We've been looking at the Psalms, which I've been calling the inspired songbook. That's what it is. These were intended to be sung by the nation of Israel and by individuals. And even in the New Testament, we're encouraged to sing these songs, these psalms. And these are inspired by God. They're teaching us about emotions a lot of the time. They're teaching us how God expects us to feel and to think about different situations in life. And so there's a lot of emotion that we get through the poetry that we read. In the Psalms, we've looked at the last time the Psalms of lament or crying out to God, this deep, sometimes sorrow over sin, sometimes just in trouble from oppression, maybe even as a result of their sin. But today we're going to look at these Psalms of trust, and this is going to have, even in the Psalms of Lament that we looked at last time, we saw the element of trust that is often or almost always found in those Psalms. But the ones we're looking at today is where trust is the focus of the Psalm. So that's what we're going to look at today. So I thought we would just look at 4 Psalms. These are pretty short, but we can take a look at the Psalms that you guys have come up with as well. Not in as much detail, but we can take a look at those. So we're going to look at Psalm 3, Psalm 4, Psalm 23, which is probably the most popular passage in the whole Bible, and Psalm 121. All right, so the first question that I already put in the comments is, what are some Psalms that display a lot of trust in God? So Brittany says Psalm 56. So let me just try to get this in. We'll do verse 1 through 5 first. All right, so it says here, "Be merciful to me, O God, for man would swallow me up. Fighting all day, he oppresses me. My enemies would hound me all day, for there are many who fight against me, O Most High. Whenever I am afraid, I will trust in you. In God, I will praise his word. In God, I have put my trust. I will not fear. What can flesh do to me? All day they twist my words. All their thoughts are against me for evil." They gather together, they hide, they mark my steps, when they lie in wait for my life. Shall they escape by iniquity? In anger cast down the peoples, O God. You number my wanderings. Put my tears into your bottle. Are they not in your book? When I cry out to you, then my enemies will turn back. This I know, because God is for me. In God I will praise his word. In the Lord I will praise his word. In God I have put my trust. I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? Vows made to you are binding upon me, O God. I will render praises to you, for you have delivered my soul from death. Have you not kept my feet from falling, that I may walk before God in the light of the living? So here's a psalm where David has been talking about the problems of the people, that he would have been overcome except for God. But he expresses this deep trust in God, where he knows that God is going to help him. he knows this. He has that confidence. And so, yes, that's a really great psalm of trust, Psalm 56. Anybody else that wants to share any others that you know of, you're welcome to do so in the comments. All right, but let's go ahead and look at Psalm 3. Okay. Well, before we do that, Brittany has said the superscript, which my little program doesn't put in there, but the superscript for Psalm 56 says, "To the chief musician set to the silent dove in distant lands. A miktam of David when the Philistines captured him in Gath." And she says her Bible has a footnote for 1 Samuel 21, verse 11. And that says, "And the servants of Achish said to him, 'Is this not David, the king of the land? Did they not sing of him to one another in dances, saying, Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s?'" This is when David was running from Saul, and he went there, and they said, "Hey, this is David, the one who's been anointed king, and the one that they sing praises of because he killed so many of our people, the Philistines." And he had killed Goliath, and so they were going to probably kill David. David ended up acting insane, and Achish said, "Don't I have enough madmen here?" and had him sent out. And so David escaped with his life that way. But he gives this praise to God. He trusts God even in such a situation as that. So that's a cool tie-in to this idea of trust. Trust is not only to be there when things are going well. In fact, it's when things look really awful that trust is most important. And so that's something that we do see with that one. We're going to see that also with some of these others that we look at today. All right, Psalm 3, a psalm of David when he fled from Absalom, his son. So you remember Absalom, the son of David, committed treason. He got the nation behind him over the course of many years of several years anyway, of being a good politician and promising people whatever they wanted to hear. And so he was a good-looking man and told people, "Yeah, I'd be on your side," whatever it was. And so he won the hearts of the people. And so they turned against David, and David had to run and pretty quickly had to escape Jerusalem with his men that were loyal to him and most of his family. And they got out in shame. But this is something what he writes about this situation. And even if you don't accept the superscription as being inspired, that perhaps it might be inaccurate, what he says in here is talking about a situation where he has tens of thousands of people against him. So it's that type of situation anyway. All right. "Lord, how they have increased to trouble me. Many are they who rise up against me. Many are they who say of me, there is no help for him in God. Selah. But you, O Lord, are a shield for me, my glory, and the one who lifts up my head. I cried to the Lord with my voice, and he heard me from his holy hill. Selah. I lay down and slept. I awoke, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people who have set themselves against me all around. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God, for you have struck all my enemies on the cheekbone. You have broken the teeth of the ungodly. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing is upon your people. Selah. And just as a reminder, even though I'm reading that Selah, I don't have any idea what that means, other than perhaps it was musical notation. That's one of the guesses, where it means like a pause here. But we really don't know what that means. But it's been left in because it's part of the inspired writing. So even if we don't know what it is, we just leave it in there. Okay. All right. So our second question for today is, what is David's situation in which he is expressing his trust in Psalm 3? So what situation is David in? Whether you have the superscription or not, what is his situation? And he's expressing trust in this situation. This would be an appropriate situation for a psalm of lament as well, it would seem to me. And this would, there were situations similar to this where David wrote psalms of lament, asking God, why is this happening? Or even saying, I know this is happening because of my sin, which this was. This was a result of David's sin with Bathsheba. And yet he knows that God is going to be with him. He's expressing trust in this case. So what's his situation? Maybe because we've already talked about this, nobody wants to answer it because it's too obvious, but he says there are many who rise up against me. And they're saying there's no help for him in God. So his situation is, people are saying we're going to get him. God is not going to help him. And there's a lot of people like that. He says, I will not be afraid. There in verse 6, I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people who have set themselves against me all around. And that's not an exaggeration. I mean, we think, nobody has 10,000s of people who are against them, right? Well, David did. He had the whole nation of Israel, except for the few that were loyal to him, coming after him. It was the nation against him, and that was at least 10,000s of people. They had rejected him as king. They wanted to set up his son Absalom as king. And so he had a lot of people who were against him, who thought God has rejected him. He's not going to help him. And yet they were wrong. Now, in verse 7, I'll go ahead and put that one in there. In verse 7, David says that God has broken the teeth of the ungodly. And what does that mean? What does he mean by that? I'll go back to this one, so I don't quite give away the answer, but what does it mean that he has he struck all the enemies on the cheekbone and broke the teeth of the ungodly? All right, so Mzwandile's answered question number 2, that David has many enemies who rise up against him, but he put his trust in God. And that's a great summary of the situation. Yeah. So what is it here that in verse 7, you struck all my enemies on the cheekbone, you've broken the teeth of the ungodly? What does that mean? Does it mean that God literally reached down and slapped them on the cheek and broke their teeth? I don't believe that anybody would actually believe that God literally struck them on the cheek and shattered their teeth. This is a poetic way of explaining what God has done. But what is it explaining? In what way did God shatter their teeth? Okay, you're welcome to go ahead and put your comments in. I'll go ahead and go to this one and see if you can see the connection here between what these people are saying with their mouths. There we go. Sibusiso says it means he has silenced them by proving them wrong. And that's absolutely right. They say there's no help for him in God. But he says when you save, what you've done is you've shut them up. It's like you've come down and struck them on the mouth, broken their teeth. They can't say this anymore, that there's no help for him in God. You've proven them wrong. And so you have silenced them. It's a rather physical picture here, a very forceful picture of how God silences them. But it's intended to be powerful. When God saves, though, and somebody has said, no, God's not going to save that person, well, that's a very, very powerful thing that God is doing. It's teaching. It's a very powerful lesson for these people that God has that power. You can think of a lot of cases in the Bible where this type of thing happened. Where Nebuchadnezzar asks Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who is the God who will save you from me? And of course, God does save them. And then he praises God, and he says, there is no God like this God. His teeth were broken, right? He was shut up as far as what he was saying about God. And we find even when Paul, the apostle, gets bitten by the viper on the island of Malta, the people said, oh, he must have been a murderer. He was a criminal who escaped death at sea, but now justice has caught up to him. And so he's going to die. And then when he didn't die, they said, oh, he must be a god. Well, they missed the point, but I'm sure Paul explained to them, even though we're not directly told about that. But I'm sure that he used that as an opportunity to teach them about the true God. That's what Paul did wherever he went. So here these people are saying, you know what, God has rejected David. He's not going to save him. Or they may be saying, God can't save him. We're too many. So even God can't help him. But God proves them wrong. And if you remember the story of the actual battle that happened between the nation of Israel and David's men when Absalom came after him, it says that the forest, the wilderness, actually killed more of them that day than the fighting did. God is the one who really was fighting for David there. All right, so that we're not looking at everything in these, but these are some of the things that these are short psalms, and just that trust that's expressed here. That's the main focus of this psalm. And even in this terrible situation, 10,000s of people against him, he trusts God. And the reason he trusts him is in verse 8, salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing is upon your people. He knows he's one of God's people. That's why he has confidence in God saving him. All right, Psalm 4. To the chief musician with stringed instruments, a psalm of David. Hear me when I call, O God of my righteousness. You have relieved me in my distress. Have mercy on me and hear my prayer. How long, O you sons of men, will you turn my glory to shame? How long will you love worthlessness and seek falsehood? Selah. But know that the Lord has set apart for himself him who is godly. The Lord will hear when I call to him. Be angry and do not sin. Meditate within your heart on your bed and be still. Selah. Offer the sacrifices of righteousness and put your trust in the Lord. There are many who say, who will show us any good? Lord, lift up the light of your countenance upon us. You have put gladness in my heart more than in the season that their grain and wine increased. I will both lie down in peace and sleep, for you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. All right, so here we don't necessarily know the particular circumstance, and there may not be a particular circumstance that inspired, well, let me use a more accurate term, that led to David writing this by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. But we can see that this type of situation comes up a lot throughout our lives as well. The way that people speak about their situation in life and how God is blessing them. So let's take a look at this. All right, so there's a question in this psalm about how long. And we looked in the Psalms of Lament last time about this is a question that's commonly asked in the Psalms of Lament. How long, O Lord, will you not save me, essentially? How long until you do something about this situation? So what's different about that and what he's saying in this Psalm of Trust about how long? So what's the difference between these questions of how long in the Psalms of Lament and the Psalm of Trust? What's the difference here? In verse 2. So, all right, we'll come back to that. I'll give you some time to answer that, but he's asking God to hear him when he calls, which can also seem a bit like the Psalms of Lament. Asking God to help him, have mercy on me and hear my prayer, he says there in verse 1. But now in verse 2, I'll just read what Bongoletu says here. David is asking how long towards the sons of men, whereas Psalm 6 from last time, David is asking God how long will he be greatly troubled. And that's right. He's directing the question to men here instead of to God. He's not asking God how long. That's not a wrong thing to ask. That we see that in the Psalms of Lament, but here in this psalm where trust is really the focus of it, he's turning to the men and saying, how long, O you sons of men, will you turn my glory to shame? You're talking evil about what is good. I'm glorying in God and in my situation that God has put me in, and you're making it to be a shameful thing. How long will you love worthlessness and seek falsehood? These are people who are valuing material things more than spiritual things. In verse 6, well, I may be getting ahead of myself, but that's basically what's going on here. Hold on. I'm forgetting my own questions. Yeah. All right. I'll come back to that idea here in just a little bit. But he says that in verse 3, but know that the Lord has set apart for himself him who is godly. The Lord will hear when I call to him. Do you see the trust involved in that? And he's calling on somebody in verse 5 to put their trust in the Lord. And so in in Psalm 4, verses 4 and 5, who is he talking to? When he says, be angry and do not sin. Meditate within your heart on your bed and be still, and offer the sacrifices of righteousness, and put your trust in the Lord. So who is he talking to, and what are they angry about? And that may have confused some people if you're reading a different translation, because not all translations say be angry. Some say be in awe, or fear, be in fear, or something like that. Or tremble. The word there literally means tremble in the Hebrew. And so that's why it's translated in a bit of different ways, but it's quoted by Paul in Ephesians chapter 4 as be angry and do not sin. And that's why, and that's from the Septuagint. The Greek translation of this says be angry and do not sin. And so that's a proper translation of this. And so that's why I'm just accepting that that's what it says, even though not all translators believe that's what it means. That some think it's just being in awe of God. That's the trembling here. But because the New Testament quotes it as be angry and do not sin, I think it's fine just to accept that translation of it. Okay, but who is it? Who is he talking to? And here's, I said, who do you think David is speaking to? Because this is kind of a thought question. I'm not sure that we know the answer to this, or I don't know if I know the answer to this. So I thought it'd be good to get your ideas about it. And what are they angry about? So here's a couple of possibilities. If you're welcome to still answer. But he says, there are these people who are turning his glory to shame, who love worthlessness and seek falsehood. And so it may be that he's even talking to himself, saying, be angry at those people, but do not sin. Okay, it's fine to be angry with people who are saying evil things, who are doing evil things. It's fine to be angry, but don't let your anger lead you to sin. How do you deal with it? You meditate within your heart on your bed and be still. He's not saying go out and do something to these people. Meditate and look at what they're saying and compare that to the reality, this trust that we have in God. Know that the Lord has set apart for himself him who is godly. The Lord will hear when I call to him. I'm not going to let what these people are saying get to me. I'm going to just calm down, meditate, think about what's true, and not sin because of my anger. And he could be speaking to the other godly people. The Lord has set apart for himself him who is godly. And so he's speaking to the other godly people. Be angry and do not sin. Same situation. And offer the sacrifices of righteousness and put your trust in the Lord. So those are the two possibilities that I thought of, either himself or other godly people who are angry probably because of what these wicked people are saying and doing. And yet we should not ever let that lead us to commit sin. All right, so that's a possibility. If you have any other ideas, please go ahead and put those in the comments. All right, so then in verse 7, what is it that gives David gladness, and with what does he contrast this? So there in verse 7, what is it that gives him gladness, and what does he contrast that with? this is, I think, a big part of this psalm, the message of this psalm. Here are these people who are saying, well, they're turning David's glory to shame, loving worthlessness, and they're saying in verse 6, who will show us any good? And the idea, I believe, is that they're saying we need stuff. We need material blessings. Who's going to give us what we want? And of course, we see this with all kinds of religions today, don't we? The Shimbe religion is built off of this idea that if you follow Shimbe, you'll be able to get a job. You'll be able to get all these things. You'll be healthy. Of course, those are all lies. But that is the promise that they're making. And that's true not only of the Shimbe religion, but of many denominations. It's what we refer to often as the health and wealth gospel, which is not a gospel at all, but it's what a lot of people are seeking. They're seeking health and wealth. And that's what these people were looking for, it seems, especially the wealth part. They loved worthlessness. So what is it there in verse 7 that makes David glad? And with what does he contrast that? I'm not seeing any answers. I don't know if we have a big delay today or if it's just a difficult question, or maybe it's a too easy question. I know that sometimes if it's too easy, people don't like to answer either. But he says in verse 7, you have put gladness in my heart. Where does this gladness come from? It comes from God. Just as simple as that. It's not any stuff. It's not physical blessings that make him happy. It is God himself and his relationship with him, his trust in him, his confidence that God hears him when he calls to him. He has peacefulness in verse 8. I will both lie down in peace and sleep, for you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. That is his source of gladness. He can sleep at night because he trusts God. What a great blessing. But what does he contrast that with? Well, verse 7, you have put gladness in my heart more than in the season that their grain and wine increased. All right, Subasiso says having Jehovah makes David glad in his heart versus having all these material things. That's absolutely it. Yes, that's a good way to put it. Mzwandile says David has put trust in his heart. He contrasts that with the way people think of grain and wine. Yes. So, these people they are happy, they're glad when they have plenty of grain and wine, when their material possessions are abundant, but they don't have the type of gladness that David has even without those things. He has gladness because of his relationship with God. And so that's a beautiful idea that we have. When we trust God, we can have peace, we can have gladness. It doesn't matter what material things we have. That is not what gives true gladness. That is not the source of real peace and safety. Okay, God is the source of real peace and safety. Of course, even in this world that we are in right now, where this virus has been causing havoc for almost a year now, and however people think about it, it's causing havoc, isn't it? With our work situations, with with our health, with all kinds of stuff. People have died from it. It's really a big deal. And yet, we can lie down in peace and sleep, can't we? That's not saying that we're saying we'll never get the virus. That's not saying that we won't even die from it, even though we know the statistics say we have a very low chance, but I know people who died from it. So it's not impossible. So but that's not the point. We can lie down in peace and sleep, even knowing all of that, because we trust God. It doesn't matter if we have health. It doesn't matter if we have wealth. People are worried about the economic situation with how things have been shut down. Well, guess what? We'll be fine because we trust in God, and He is going to help us. God's people don't go around begging bread. We have our daily bread, and so we'll be fine. If you're worried about losing your standard of life, don't worry about that. That's not what life is about. Okay, you can be in poverty. You can go from being wealthy to be in poverty, and you'll still be fine. You can still have gladness in your heart because you trust in God. David knew that. David was he was the king. He knew how to go from that to being dependent on other people to take care of him when he had to run from Absalom. And he's had other difficult situations in his life like that. He knew how to go from one stage to the other. The Apostle Paul talked about that. I know how to be in abundance, and I know how to be hungry. Either way, I'm content because I'm with the Lord. That's the idea that we see in this psalm, this trust in God that brings contentment and gladness. All right, let's look at Psalm 23. This is, as I said, I think this is probably at least one of, if not the most popular passages in the Bible. It's often quoted among the Jews as well as among Christians. It is something that is it's memorized by most people, I think. Well, I don't know if most people is the right term, but most people that are familiar with the Bible in any way are familiar with Psalm 23. All right, so let's go ahead and read it. A Psalm of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Now, I didn't bother color coding the verses on this one because they would all be yellow on this one. Every single statement, I believe, in this psalm has to do with trust. And I think that's probably one of the reasons this is such a popular psalm. It's not very long, but it's just so powerful in expressing the trust that we have in God and what God does for us. It's a very powerful psalm. All right, so the Lord is my shepherd. That's the picture here. God being the shepherd. Some people believe that every single statement in here relates to that picture of him being a shepherd and us being the sheep. I have a little bit of trouble with that, especially because I haven't done enough research to really know to be confident in some of the things that I've heard about what shepherds do or did in those days. I don't know what the situation was. It's possible that some of these things, even preparing a table before me in the presence of my enemies, and my cup runs over. I have a hard time seeing how that ties in. I know people make it tie in even with the shepherd and the sheep, but I don't know that everything has to tie into that picture, but a lot of it does. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me, clearly ties into that picture. And so, of course, dwelling in the house of the Lord forever, I don't believe, well, I guess you can make that tie in a sense as well. But there's more to it. We don't have to make everything just the picture of the shepherd and the sheep. But it's certainly a beautiful picture that we can understand the point of, even if we don't understand how a shepherd and his sheep were interacting in those days. So it's a powerful image. But one of the things that he says here is that he leads me in the paths of righteousness. And I think most of us can probably even finish that quote. And so why is it? For what purpose does God do that? Why does God lead us in the paths of righteousness? This is something we looked at last time in the Psalms of Lament. Remember David, or whoever was writing, would give God a reason a lot of the time to save him, to help him in whatever situation he was in. He would give him a reason. And here we're told a reason why God does lead us in the paths of righteousness. Why does God want us to lead a righteous life? Why has he taught us the right way to live? Well, we know it's good for us. I mean, that it's the right way to live. It is the way he designed us to live. But when we live that way, what does it do? What does it do for God? All right. Verse 3, he leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Okay, so he is doing this for the sake of his name. It glorifies him when we are walking in those paths of righteousness, because we're doing things the right way. It is good for us. We can see the wisdom of God in this, because we didn't come up with this. We didn't come up with the paths of righteousness. God leads us in those paths of righteousness. He's the one who's taught us how to do it. In our case, he even sent his son to demonstrate how to do it. And so we have very powerful ways of understanding the right way to live. And when we live that way and we see the outcome, it glorifies God. It's for his name's sake. All right, Psalm 23, verse 4. Let's see, Psalm 23, verse 4. It says, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. So what is the valley of the shadow of death? This is a psalm that's often read at funerals, and that's not necessarily inappropriate, but we need to understand how it is being used, or how it should be used. What does it mean when he talks about, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death? What is the valley of the shadow of death? So I looked at some commentaries on this, and some of them were saying that they didn't think this was even a proper translation of it, because they have some of their own ideas of what that word actually means. But the ancient translations translated it this way, and so that's why it's kept this way. To me, that's a bit arrogant, I think, to think that today they Well, maybe it depends on what they mean by ancient translations. But I think a lot of times they understood the language even better a long, long time ago. And so I think this is probably an appropriate translation, even though it's a very powerful, beautiful picture. And unfortunately, I think the wording throws people off a little bit sometimes. But what is the valley of the shadow of death? Basically, here's the point I'm trying to get at. Nobody wants to answer this, so maybe it's too obvious, but it's not death itself. That's not the point. It's not, even though I die, I will fear no evil. Now, we can apply it to that, but that's not the point. It's just, basically, it's the picture of walking through a valley where there's deep shadow. And this would be where a lot of people would be afraid. But he says, I'm not afraid because you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You have the weapons to protect me. Sibasiso says, I think it could refer to this life's uncertainties. We can still trust in the Lord and his leadership. Yeah, that's great. Uncertainties. I like that way of putting it. In shadow, you can't see everything, can you? It's so dark. You don't know what's there, and that's why it's scary. You don't know what's there. It's uncertain. And so that's the idea. Now, that can apply to death. I mean, when you're dying, when you're in the process of dying, this is a good psalm to comfort you. This is a good psalm to apply to that because, I mean, when are you more in the valley of the shadow of death, this uncertain time, than when you're actually dying, right? Yes, we know something about what happens when we die, but we don't know exactly what happens when we die. It's scary. And yet we trust in God, right? And so when it's read at a funeral, of course, it's too late for that to apply to the one who's already passed. They don't trust God anymore. They don't have to trust him anymore. They see with their own eyes, or they're unaware until the resurrection, or whatever happens in reality. I don't know. I know a lot of people know. I don't, because I think the Bible talks about it in so many different ways that it's something in a spiritual way that we don't really understand what happens when we die. And I'm not concerned about that because I trust God. I know what happens in the resurrection, and that's enough. But the idea is that we don't, those people don't need this psalm when they're dead, but this is good for the living, because when your loved one passes away, it's a tough time. And you don't always know what's going to happen now or whatever. And yet you can trust the Lord, right? Life is uncertain, but God is certain. And so we can have confidence in him. All right. All right. So just to look at this just very briefly, a couple of other things. One of the things that he says is in verse 6, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And that's a great picture. So even in this life, we have goodness and mercy. And that's David saying this, the one who suffered a lot in his life. And yet he says, goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. I have confidence in that. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And that I don't believe that forever just means until he dies. I believe that means forever here. He's looking past this life as well. And our confidence in God, really, the thing that really makes us trust in him is our confidence in what comes after. Because we don't know. if we're going to die in any particular situation. We don't know if we're going to suffer greatly. I know there's very young people who suffer a lot with their health and other things. They might be oppressed in their life, all their life, and yet they can still trust in God, still have goodness and mercy from Him, and look forward to being in His house for eternity. And that's where our trust really comes in. All right. The last psalm we're looking at is Psalm 121. And this is a psalm that I learned to sing when I was probably in second grade. One of the teachers she was really good. She put a tune to this in the King James Version. But anyway, so I remember this one. I don't always remember what number of psalm it is, but I remember the words fairly well because of that. But this is a song of ascents, and we haven't really talked about that. This is the most common, I believe, idea of what that means is that this is a song that they would sing as they went up to the temple. So ascending to the temple, a song of ascents. I don't think everybody agrees with that definition, but that's how I learned it. And I think that's probably the most common understanding of what that means, that these were probably songs they would sing as they went up to the temple. Well, here, this is a psalm of trust, but it's not only for the individual, I don't believe. And we'll see that as we go through it. I will lift up my eyes to the hills. From whence comes my help? My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. He will not allow your foot to be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord shall preserve you from all evil. He shall preserve your soul. The Lord shall preserve your going out and your coming in from this time forth and even forevermore. So that's a great psalm as well, and of trust in God. We could even call it almost a psalm of blessing. It's saying this is what's going to happen to you, isn't it? So in Psalm 121 here in verses 2 and 3, there's a switch in sorry, thought I had that here, but anyway, here. Now there's a switch in the person that is speaking from where does my help come from in verse 1? My help comes from the Lord. And then in verse 3, he will not allow your foot to be moved. So it goes from talking about me to talking about you. Why is that? Why is there a transition there? Why is there me and you in this? And really the you is most of what we find in this psalm. And I said you can look at verse 4 for an idea about that. And other people may have a different idea than I do, but this is how I understand it. And we're just about out of time, so I'm going to go ahead and just answer this. But he talks about God keeping Israel in verse 4. And so the idea, I believe, is that this is a psalm of trust for the nation. This is, it's for me, but it's for you. This is what God does for his people. This is not a psalm necessarily of personal trust in my situation in life. I'm going to trust God. This is, I trust God to do this for his people, for his nation. And so this is what he's talking about. This idea of lifting up my eyes to the hills, that his looking for his help. The idea is that they're in trouble somehow, and they're looking for salvation. maybe an army coming down from the hills to help, right? And many commentators will say this is actually referring to Zion, the hill of the Lord or mountain of the Lord who's coming. And that may be, I don't know. I don't think there's anything necessarily in the psalm that would indicate that, but certainly the point is that his help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. Those mountains were made by God. And so, that's who is going to help. And so he says, God does not sleep. He's not like what Elijah, made fun of Baal with, when the prophets of Baal were trying to get Baal to send fire down. And he said, maybe he's asleep, call louder. Well, God isn't like that. He does not slumber. He does not sleep. And he provides shade, protection. In verse 5, the Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun, so he's shade from the sun, and he's shade from the moon. The sun will not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. So you're not going to get burned by the sun. You're not going to get whatever ill effects may be from the moon or thought of to be by the moon. There's a lot of different ideas about why God needs to protect from the moon. But there was an idea, at least in some areas and in certain times, that the moon brings a certain type of craziness. That's where the term lunacy comes from. Lunar, the moon, lunacy, craziness. I don't know that that's what it's referring to, but that is an idea. Of course, I think a lot of nurses who work in casualty wards, emergency rooms would agree with that at full moon, a lot of people are acting crazy. But anyway, there is an idea that whatever ill effects may be from the sun or from the moon, either way, day or night, that's really the point here. Day or night, God is protecting you from whatever's there. And the Lord will preserve you from all evil. He'll preserve your going out, your coming in from this time forth and even forevermore. And that's just a beautiful psalm of trust in God to keep his people in general. And again, I didn't bother color coding this one because it would all be yellow. Everything in here is trust in God. This is a psalm really dedicated to that idea, even though it's not necessarily personal trust, it's trust in what God will do for all of his people. But of course, you can apply this to yourself anyway. All right, well, that's it. Our time's up, and that's what we plan to talk about today. So next time on Tuesday, Lord willing, we'll talk about Psalms of Praise. And if you have any favorite Psalms of Praise that you would like us to look at, or any interesting ones that you'd like us to talk about, go ahead and let me know. There's a lot of them, so we're just going to have to pick out a few, and we'll see what we can do there. All right, let's go ahead and say a prayer, and then we'll be finished. Our Holy Father, we're so grateful that you allowed us to have this study today, that you gave us your word, these beautiful psalms that teach us how to trust in you and how to speak to you in trust, and how to speak to other people in trust in you as well. Help us to demonstrate that trust in our lives. Help us to live that way, to have gladness in our hearts, whatever our situation is, because of our relationship with you. We know that you are a good God, that you are the only God who has true power, who never sleeps or slumbers, and you will always protect your people. Thank you for that. And we pray that you will protect us, help us to be healthy, and help us to be safe. But above all, help us to live our lives in a way that glorifies you. Lead us in the paths of righteousness for your name's sake. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Well, thank you for your participation. Thanks for being with us in the class, and I hope you have a good rest of the week. Lord willing, I'll see you on Tuesday. Bye.